Hey, welcome back. This is the final part of the HTML, CSS, JavaScript crash course. This is where the crash part comes in. We're going to stumble through some JavaScript. JavaScript is a much larger topic than things like HTML and CSS. And as you saw in the last CSS video, I had to skip through many things and just tell you not to worry about them, just copy this, just to focus on the key points. That's going to happen in this video, but worse, because there's a lot to talk about. And I had a choice. Do I show you the very, very basics and leave you with no end result? Or do I show you something a bit more intermediate and maybe breeze through some of the syntax or explanation in order to make something? And I decided, because this is a short format, it's YouTube, I wanted to make something that makes you feel good at the end. We are going to do the latter. We're going to make a project, and that means that some of this is going to go really quickly, but that's okay, because the point is to just expose you to JavaScript, have you feel comfortable with the idea of what JavaScript does, what it brings to the table compared to HTML and CSS. Remember, HTML is the structure, CSS is the style, JavaScript is a whole bunch of things. It's the interactivity, it's the loading of new data, it's the sending of HTTP requests, it's what allows you to make games. I could go on and on, there's just a lot. But we're going to focus on getting this button to do something, to do this, to switch the source of the image tag. So this is actually a really common pattern in JavaScript. What we do is we work with HTML elements, just like we did with CSS. We select elements based off of a name or something like an ID, and then we style them. With JavaScript, we're going to select elements like the button. And I'm going to write code that specifies when this particular button is clicked, do something. And that something is going to be to take this image tag. So we're also going to need to select the image using JavaScript. And we're going to update the source. We're going to change this from kitty bed to maybe kitty door or kitty laptop. One of these photos. Okay, so I've opened the file up. It's called app.js. And there's already a little code in here for you. First, before we talk about that, this is how you write a JavaScript comment. So you could add any notes you want, typing 2 slashes. It's the easiest comment out of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, in my opinion. You can also use command slash, as always. Type a little note, and you can toggle it on and off with command or control slash. Okay, so what I've given you here, I just didn't want you to have to type this yourself. It's a list of the image titles, or the URLs. So we have this first one, images/kittybed.jpg. This is a list of all the other ones, all 6. And the approach we're going to take, we're going to run code that every time you click the button, we're starting with this image URL. We're going to keep track of where we are, and then we're going to add one and move forward to this one and update the image to this URL. Then you click the button again, and we'll update to this one. And we'll keep moving until we hit the end, in which case we'll have to wrap back around. But we'll get there. So this is our first bit of syntax. This is what's known as a variable. So it is a list of data. It's called an array. That's what these brackets mean, but don't get too caught up. And we're storing it under the name pics. This is up to us. We could call this images, if I could spell. You could call this my cat stuff. It really doesn't matter, but we have to refer back to it later. And if you're following along, pics will be the easiest. And this var keyword just means that this is a variable. And a variable just means that I can refer to it later and have access to this information. So there's a lot, I know. Let's begin by selecting the button so that when I click it, I can do something. And I'm going to show you some code here. It looks like this, document.querySelector, and then I'm going to pass in button. What this code will do is it's going to go search the document, HTML document, and it's going to look for the first instance of button. I could also do query selector all, which will find all buttons, but we only have one, so it doesn't matter. Query selector button. And it's going to go find the button, kind of like what CSS does here, except we're going to store it in a variable, and I'll just call it btn. Again, up to you. Name that something that you'll remember. I mean, it's in the same file, so it shouldn't be hard. And I'll add my semicolons, which are not deal breakers as much as they are in CSS. You need them there, but that's for another video. What this has done now is I've gone and selected the button, and then I've saved it to a variable called btn. But there's a problem. Just like in the last video, just typing code in here doesn't do anything unless I link to it over here. They're not connected. I'm going to connect them now. And to do that, I'm going to show you another tag called the script tag. So I'm going to type script and then hit tab. And I'm going to put it at the bottom of the body. And the reason for that is that our script is going to rely on data, on elements that are defined earlier. We need to reference the button tag. And if I put this before the button tag, the code is going to run before the button exists. So we put it at the bottom. And I need to add in a source attribute that says app.js. That's the name of our file over here. So if we have more than one script, put whatever file you want there. Just like with our CSS, we could have two style sheets, one called app2.css. So we put this here, and if we want to make sure that it's working, at the very beginning we can type alert hello from app.js. Alert is a really annoying little bit of code. It's known as a function, and it's just built into your browser. It will make a little pop-up. You may have seen these before on particularly scummy websites. They'll use alert sometimes. So if we save and reload our page, we should be able to tell that it's working if we get that pop-up. And there we go. This page says hello from app.js. So of course that's not what our end goal is. Our end goal is this. So let's start by, we've selected that button. Now how do we know when it's clicked? This is some other JavaScript syntax that's going to potentially be very scary. I'm going to type btn, the button we selected and saved. We captured it in a little variable with this name, btn.add event listener. So JavaScript is very centered around events that happen on your page. When you click on something, when you hover over something, when you type a letter, there's tons of events that are happening all the time. And we can take JavaScript and listen for those events and do something. And we're going to listen for a click on that button. So that's not the only type of event that we could listen for, but that's what we care about when you click on this. So we've selected it over here. Now I want to run something when we click. And this is the other scary part. Function, parentheses, curly braces, and then I'm going to hit enter and add a semicolon at the end. All that I'll say about that little piece of beautiful code, this is one of the hardest things about learning JavaScript, is that some of the syntax is very ugly compared to some other languages. What I type inside of these brackets will run whenever this button is clicked. Basically says, add an event listener to this thing for when a click happens. When it does happen, run this code. And let's just start by alerting clicked. And I'm going to get rid of this annoying alert up top. So now we should only see alert if we click on the button. Moment of truth, if we refresh, nothing should change. I'm going to click, and there we go. So we now are listening for a click and running code whenever we click that button. All we have left to do, which is still a good amount, is change the source of this image when it's clicked on. Okay, so let's start by just identifying how we even find the source of that image. And to do that, we have to follow the same process of selecting the image first. So I'm going to make a new variable called img. Again, up to you to use a good name that makes sense. And I'm going to set it equal to document.querySelector. And what am I going to select? I want to select the image tag. To select the button, I used button, the name of the tag. To select the image, I use image, the name of the tag. Just like that. I know I'm moving really fast. I just want to be here to support you. It's okay if this is crazy to you. Just play along and try and focus on these high overall ideas. We select something and then we do something when we clicked on it. But now we're going to focus on the image and we want to change the source. Before we change it, let's just let me just show you how you actually access the source. So we have this thing called img. We can do .source, .src, which should be this, images/kittybed.jpg. And if I just do this on its own, it's basically going to access, it's going to ask what is the source, and then just disappear into the darkness. It's never going to show up anywhere. We're not printing it. So let's alert that. And this is really just an intermediate step for us to understand what happens. This is not something we're going to keep in the final result. But if I refresh now and I click, there we go. This is what's alerted. That's the source. What we want to do is now update that source. And we could start by just picking any of these. Let's do kitty in the sink. Just copy one URL, totally up to you. And we're going to change img.source to equal that URL. So this will only work one time. You click on the beginning, it will be kitty bed, and then we change it to this. But then every time you click after that, it's going to keep changing it to this. So again, it's just an intermediate step. But now it should change to this photo. Oh my gosh, massive photo. Let's test it. Refresh, click, and it changes. But now every other time it is changing, but it's just changing to the same source over and over. The code still runs though. So here's the biggest challenge at this point. I have to explain to you how we access data out of these arrays. This is an array where there's all of these pieces of data in a list. They're in a row, and there's an order. The way we access things is using the variable name pix, and then square brackets and a number. Each one of these has a number that corresponds to it. This one starts at 0, and then this is 1, this is 2, I'm not typing real code, all the way up to 5. So to access, let's go to kitty basket down here. Instead, I'm going to have to get rid of those numbers. Maybe I'll put them over here as comments. There we go. So to change it to this URL, I could access pix1, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to delete that and just change to pix1. And now if I refresh the page and click, it goes to pix1, which is kitty in the basket, looking extra grumpy. Now what we need to do is have this number change. We want to start at 1 or 0 and then go to 1. And then next time you click, it should go to 2 and then go to 3 and to 4 and to 5. To do that, we're going to need to make a variable here. Instead of using 1 every time, we're going to make a variable. I'm just going to call it, let's go with counter. And let's start it at 1. And the reason I'm going to start it at 1 is that kitty bed is already here. So if I started at 0, the first time we click, it would change to kitty bed again, and then it would change to 1 and to 2. Right now, it's not going to change at all. Counter is always set to 1. So if I replace 1 with the word counter, you could fill in this value here. It's just saying, all right, change the image's source to the counter item, which is 1, in the pix array, which is this. It's sort of like cross-checking. Counter is 1, pix1 gives us that, change this source. And if I refreshed and rerun the code, nothing would change because it's just going to have kitty basket. But there's this one thing that we're going to do now, which is after we change it, we want to update counter. And I'm going to do this. Counter equals counter plus 1. So this says take counter and reset it, update it to be the current counter value plus 1. So the first time through, counter is 1. We do pix1, and then this line runs. And this says counter plus 1, which is 2, is the new value for counter. So then next time you click, it's now going to do pix of 2, giving us this. And then counter will be updated to 3. So next time through, goes here, and it keeps going until we hit the end, and we'll see what happens. So let's try. Refresh. Moment of truth. We click. It worked. It worked again. It works again. Works again. One more time. Now we're at the end. And if I try, oh no, we get this ugly little error. I'm going to refresh the page one more time. And to fully understand what's happening, let's go to inspect, but change to the console tab, or you can use the shortcut Command Option J or Control Option J in Chrome to open up what's known as the JavaScript console. And this allows us to inspect and to figure out what's happening. So if I click that button again and I cause that error, after this, I trigger it, we get this error message. And you can see that it's saying file not found because it's trying to find an image called /undefined. When we access, I'm going to move pix over. I'm going to copy this code and move it over here. we start at pix 1, then we went to pix 2, then 3, and I'll just hurry up. We go to pix 5, that's the last one. Remember, we count starting at 0. 6 items, but 5 is the last number. When I go to pix 6, I get undefined. So what it's trying to do is change the source to literally be the word undefined, which is not going to work for us. Undefined is a special value in JavaScript that means nothing was found, nothing's there, it hasn't been set yet. So undefined is not going to work. What we want to do is check, all right, is I equal to 6? Then reset it to 0. If we hit the end, change it back to 0. And that's easy. To change it to 0 at least, it's just I equals 0. But if I do this, it will always be 0 every time through. Instead, we want to add some conditional logic. And the syntax looks like this. If counter triple equals the number 6, which means we've gone too far, right? That means we're at the very end. If that's the case, we're going to change it back to 0. And we use these curly braces again, and we set counter equals 0. So this code only runs when counter is exactly 6. So it starts at 1. This, when we click, is not true. So then this code runs and it moves it up to 2. Counter is 2. This goes again. This is not true because counter is 2, which is not equal to 6. Keep going until finally we get to the last image. We change the source. We update counter to be +1, meaning 6. Then next time you click, instead of trying to do image.source equals pix of 6, this catches it. If counter equals 6, it should be 0 now. And let's see if it works. Refresh the page. Moment of truth again. Let's go to that last little photo with, I think it's called Kitty Wall. And there we go. We loop back through. So we're going and going and going until we hit the end. We check. Have we gone too far? Start over. And that's it. That's the bulk of our logic. That's really it in total. We've written everything that we set out to do. I know the entire crash course was a car crash of a course, but this video in particular was very quick, very fast paced. I know I spent a lot of time trying to reassure you that's okay, but really, if you are new to programming, you're new to JavaScript, this has to be overwhelming. But my goal is that you can look at these lines of code and explain to yourself, or try to explain to yourself at least, what is responsible for what. So you don't need to be able to write this on your own immediately. That's a whole other skill that takes time to memorize this. But I would hope that you could explain to me what this line is doing, that it is selecting the button from HTML and saving it with the name btn. And then this line is saying whenever that button is clicked, run this code. And this code is changing the source of that image that we select here to be one of these images. And this image, or the counter, is going up by 1 every time we click until we hit the end, in which case we reset it. So this code is checking to see if we've gone too far and reining us back into 0. And that's kind of the gist of all of it here. There's a lot if you're new to it, but if you can break it down like that, then this was somewhat successful. If you're still lost on things, I wouldn't beat yourself up over it, because there's I have courses on JavaScript that take hours to get to this point where we actually go through. There's a lot more to talk about than just these couple of lines, but we go through and really explain. We have thorough exercises on everything. This is warp speed compared to that. Okay, so I think this marks the end of this crash course for now. Hopefully we all survived. Let's just wrap up. So we have our index.html that contains our HTML elements, the structure of the page. We use these brackets and the tag syntax to wrap to wrap data, text, and explain what it should be. This should be a header. This should be a button. This should be a paragraph. The image tag, for example, does not have any text inside of it. We pass an attribute to specify where the image should be found. Same thing as this link tag. There's no text inside to be found. All that it does is specify where to find a style sheet. Then we have our style sheet, the longest bit of code we typed. It's all relatively straightforward in that it always follows the same pattern. You select something, curly braces, if I don't mess it up like that, inside the curly braces, property, colon, a value, semicolon. Oh my gosh, messing this all up. And it all follows that format. Select something, then a property and a value, over and over and over. It's just that there's a ton of properties. So that's the hard part with CSS, is understanding all of them. And then we get to our JavaScript, and this is where we add interactivity, some functionality. Instead of just displaying things, we're actually making it do something based off of human interaction. And there's a lot of stuff happening here. We already walked through it, so I won't spend time, stepping through every line again, but just remember how it fits into the equation. HTML is the structure, CSS is the style, JavaScript is the interactivity. So next steps from here, if you enjoyed this, I guess I'm supposed to say, comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. This is my first YouTube video, or I guess at this point, the fourth in the series. This was my first thing on YouTube overall. If you did like it though, or you didn't, you could leave a comment. But as far as continuing to learn, there are tons of great resources out there. I do have courses that you can find. I'm sure I'll put a link in the description. But also there are lots of free resources online, other YouTube videos that you can continue to explore. Whatever path you go down, hopefully you have a slightly better understanding of how these three technologies fit together. Thank you for your time. And, oh yeah, help me name my cat. I'm not kidding. I really don't have a name for her right now. I've been using the name Kitty and Kitty Cat for like 2 months, and I'm ashamed. She needs a name. So leave it in the comments. Anyway, thank you, and goodbye, good night. So long, something. I need a catchphrase. I'll work on that. Anyway, bye.